My name is Roger, and I'm an introvert. And in my previous life, I used to be a soil scientist. Where's Gene Preston? Yeah, he's out there. And in an unscientific poll I took one time, I found out that 92.7% of all soil scientists are introverts. And the way you tell an introverted soil scientist from an extroverted is that when an introverted soil scientist talks to you, he looks at his shoes. When an extroverted soil scientist talks to you, he looks at your shoes. But even introverts like to get up and speak once in a while. So this trip began, I had a friend that hitchhiked out to Seattle and back. And one of the trips he caught was with a TV cameraman who told him about taking a trip on filming and canoeing on the MacKenzie River and the Yukon River the previous summer. And he came back, he told us that story. We thought, that's a great trip. That's something, yeah, that's fantastic, but that's usually all the farther it went. And we told other people about it also, but we didn't really plan on doing it. Until one day, another friend of ours came over and he said, let's do it. Let's canoe the MacKenzie River. So we started thinking about it. And I can't remember the speaker last year, the one that canoed the Mississippi River in record time. One of his statements that I always liked was he said, I could do it because I was independently broke. And that was me too. I was independently broke. I was 21. I had been trying to go back to school, which wasn't working out too good. And so I had no commitments. I had no job or anything like that. I thought, yeah, let's do this. 1972, this is pre-internet days. We didn't have access to even a computer to go out and start looking up information. So let's see here, space button. Which one do I hit here? That one, okay, yeah. This is how we found our information. Card catalogs, how many people remember card catalogs? Good. And so card catalogs, making phone calls, doing everything that we could to find out what this trip would involve. And we didn't, well, let's see. Let me keep going on here about this. So we started making our plans. We had 2 canoes. We had a tent. We started planning out what we would do for food. Our food pretty much consisted of oatmeal, cream of wheat, instant mashed potatoes, instant rice, dried soups. That's we had no freeze-dried foods or anything else like that. What else we need? We had sleeping bags, but this was before we knew about such things as just a foam pad. There were no air mattresses or anything else like that. We did not have a cook stove. All we did, we cooked all of our meals over an open fire using a grill. We were minimalists before minimalism became a movement. And we just thought this is what we need to do. Okay, well, one other thing I do remember is about a week before we took off on this trip, I went home, ate a lot of my mother's cooking so I could gain some weight, because I knew every time the previous canoe trips I'd been on, I was always hungry, so I wasn't going to be, I think I started out weighing 181 pounds, and further on the trip, halfway through the trip, I found a scale at a town that we were staying at for a little bit, and I weighed 178, so I lost a whole 3 pounds along the way. But here's the MacKenzie River. It starts out at the Great Slavey Lake, and it goes about, I think it's about 1,300 or 1,400 miles until it finally reaches the Bering Sea, part of the Arctic Ocean up there. How far is it to get up there to go canoeing? Well, our starting point became Fort Simpson, and that is, as in 1972, that's where the road ended. And so that's how far we were going to go. From Brookings to Fort Simpson, I think it says 2,033 miles. And we pretty much drove straight through with a few stops along the way, but not much. We didn't camp out any night, we just kept driving. There were 4 of us in a car, all loaded down, and that's how we got there. We did stop at Edmonton to buy some maps that we needed, and the last 400 miles from high-level Alberta to Fort Simpson were gravel. And again, some of that had just been opened up the year before. There were no gas stations along the way. We saw some black bears run across the road, but we didn't see very many people. Here's the road to Fort Simpson. This would have been after rain, very washboardy, and we did have some of that. 60th parallel. This is where the Northwest Territories of Canada started. And so there's a little setup there to tell you that you've reached the border of the Northwest Territories. And I think two of the guys were still sleeping in the car. Another guy got out, got this picture taken. And the photos that you see here, by the way, were taken with a SLR camera, but in the old days, this was not automatic. You had to have a handheld meter light meter to it. You set your f-stop, your shutter speed were all manual, and you focused in manually. So some of my slides are not that great, but some of them were pretty good. But this was reaching the Northwest Territories. Just another map of the area. You can see the outline of the drainage area that supports the MacKenzie River. And some of the talk about cubic feet per second. I wished I would have gathered some more information on that, but sometimes I don't know how many cubic feet per second that at the discharge point up at the Bering Sea was, but I think it's 100, 200,000 cubic feet per second in some cases. But there's some of the towns listed along the way, and we tried to stop in those all we could. Okay, I guess another stretch of road. This is a slide I pulled off of the internet, much better. To get to Fort Simpson, we had to cross the river on a ferry. And that trip, on the way up there on the road, I gotta take a look at my notes here once in a while to remind myself what I'm talking about, is that when we were about 50 miles from Fort Simpson, we were about out of gas, and we hadn't seen anybody. Again, maybe a black bear or two had run across the road. There were no gas stations. We didn't know we were going to be able to make it to Fort Simpson without getting some gas from somewhere. We came around a bend, and there were some workmen on the road that had a big tank of gas in the back of their pickup, and they filled us up that we had enough gas to get to Fort Simpson. We got to Fort Simpson, and that is the ferry that we had to take across, and it turned out that we saw it going across. We thought we missed it. Well, it came back one more time, and we got across, and then we found out that the ferry was about falling apart and the captain was going to quit the next day, so we caught the last ride across. We lucked out with the gas, we lucked out with getting across. And we had things like that happening. Here's a view of the MacKenzie River from Fort Simpson, and what I wanted you to see here is how wide it is, how high the riverbanks were. Because we started talking to some of the people there, and they said, oh yeah, this spring we just about got flooded out here. There was a big ice dam that built up on the river and just about flooded us out. And you look across the river and you look how far down it was, and you thought, man, that had to have been one hell of a dam. And there is a picture, this again I pulled off the internet later on, that is Fort Simpson, and that apparently there was an ice dam at that point in time too, because you can see how close the town is to getting flooded out. Okay. We left Brookings on June 12th, and we were on the river June 15th. And what's wrong with this picture? We're not wearing our PDFs. I heard, and I've learned the last couple of times here the importance of doing that, but we didn't have. What we had were the old orange vests for our life jacket, if you remember those. And instead of wearing them, we tie a rope to it and tie a rope to our belt. And figured if we went over, we could pull them to ourselves. And I've learned that that's not a good thing. You don't do it. The other thing you don't see here is we're not wearing sunscreen. And we're up, eventually got up to 24 hours of sunlight. We thought this is a hell of a way to get a good tan. Now, 50 years later, I'm paying the price. I go to see a dermatologist every 6 months. But anyhow, that's the time, that was the thing to do. That's some ice along the shoreline, and we ran across that well into July, and we ran across some blocks of ice that were 10 feet high. I've got in my notes, I kept my own personal log. And I needed to go back this to remind me of some of the things that that we did and what happened along the way. But I've got a note in there saying in July that there was some 10-foot high blocks of ice that we ran across and stuff. So. Just another shot that is called Mount Gaudet, and it was a pretty prominent thing. One of the few things that I regret about the trip is that we didn't stop and climb that. We did some exploring, but not as much as we could have, and I kind of wish we'd have climbed that. Okay, another shot. You probably can't see it, but way off in the distance there is a canoe with a couple of people in there. And that's, again, another typical day of canoeing there. Along with our food, when we plan for our food and you buy it and it'd say this is 2 servings, well, we double that or triple it or even quadruple that because we knew we were going to be eating a lot. The only time we ever overdosed on food was our first day out, and we made 24 servings of oatmeal. I think we ate about 20. To this day, I don't even know if cream of wheat still exists, but I've never had cream of wheat since that trip. Well, another supplement that we had is that we had peanut butter and jelly, and we forgot to buy bread at Port Simpson, and Wrigley was the first town that we were going to be able to hit and get some bread. Well, Wrigley had been flooded out previously, and so they moved the town across the river, and so all we did was find these abandoned buildings here. So no bread to be had for our peanut butter and jelly. Our maps were from 1957, so between 57 and 72, Wrigley had been flooded out. I guess, yeah, some more ice along the way, and this was in July. Just another shot on the river, and this was, everyday occurrence pretty much. Okay, another typical day on the MacKenzie River. The MacKenzie River is on the average mile and a half wide, 2 miles wide in some places. One place called the Ramparts, it narrowed down to about a half a mile, and the current did pick up. But on a place like this, the average current was probably 5 or 6 miles an hour. And for the most part, we had good canoeing, the weather was good, but there were times that we did get into a little bit of trouble. I used to live in Pierre, and there was I think it was a National Missouri River Conference being held in Pierre. They moved those around, I think, from city to city. And I went to one of them, and there was a talk by a guy that was wanting to create a national river trip. The Pacific Coast Trail, the Appalachian Trail, he wanted to turn that into the Missouri River. And he gave a talk, and he canoed the Missouri River from top to bottom several times, and he said, "Where's the most dangerous part on this trip?" And the answer was, on Lake Oahe, if you're out in the middle of it and the wind comes up, so you're in big trouble. Well, this river was like Lake Oahe, except it moved. It had a 5 or 6 mile an hour current. And one time we were out in the center of it, and the wind came up, and we were dealing with waves that were 3 feet high, 4 feet high, I think. And I was in the canoe with I was one of the least experienced canoers on this trip, and I was with the other guy who had even less experience than I did. And so we were battling to try to get back to shore, and we finally did, and I'd never felt so happy to feel the ground beneath my feet on that day, and we were much more careful after that. I'm not sure if this was a Boston whaler. I called it a Boston whaler. Boston whaler, is anybody familiar with what that is? They're a very fast boat. It's a boat that drug smugglers would use, that type of thing. And we did see several of those going up and down the river. There was a lot of barge travel on the river, and there were some other canoeists and kayakers too. Typical campsite, shoreline campsite. You can see our tent off there, rocky shoreline. Couple of stories here. Well, we actually spent the group, about the four of us, 6 weeks together, 4 weeks were on the river, 4 of us sleeping in a 4-man tent. And Vern Olson knows my complaints about 4-man tents.
He hates them.
They're good for 2 people, that's it. There were 4 of us in there. And once in a while, somebody would have a strange dream. One time, I woke up and the guy I was sleeping next to was embracing my sleeping bag and about to kiss it. And I woke him up and I said, "Farminky, what the hell's going on?" And he goes, "Well, he dreamed that he was at a wedding of his ex-girlfriend and he was about to kiss her. Congratulations." Another time, a different guy sat up and he goes, "1, 2, 3. He says, "Somebody's missing." And we said, "No." You know, his eyes were open, but he was asleep. And we said, "No, we're all here." And he goes, "No, 1, 2, 3. Somebody's missing." And then there was some sound outside. He goes, "What's that?" And somebody said, "Oh, that's the 4th guy." And he says, "Okay." And he laid back down. And when we landed and set up camp like this, we all had kind of duties that we just kind of fell into. Mine was to set up the fire pit, gather the firewood. Other people set up the tent and stuff like that. We took turns doing dishes, but we all had kind of duties that worked out pretty good. I was saying, if you want to get to know somebody, spend 4 weeks on a river with them and you'll get to know them very well. And at the end of this trip, we were still all friends, so that was a good thing. Let's see here. I guess, one other story about the river too. Not every day was a good day for everybody. And I'm thinking of a day that, particularly that I had, where it was a cold, wet, rainy, windy day, and I was tired. I was just exhausted, and I kept saying, "Let's stop and camp here." And another guy said, "No, let's keep going." So we put it up to a vote, and I won 3-1, except there weren't any good campsites along the way, and so we kept going. And then we voted again, and it was 2-2, and then I really became irritated. I wouldn't paddle as hard. I kept whining and complaining about everything, but we finally kept going. The sun finally came out. We found a nice campsite. We put the tent up. Before I did anything, I rolled my sleeping bag out, and I was asleep the moment I hit that sleeping bag. And I had a watch with me. I'm the only one that carried a watch, so I don't know why. Because, we had this joke was, "Do you have daylight savings time?" And the answer was yes, we save it 24 hours a day. But it was 6 o'clock when I laid down, and then I woke up at 12, and I felt very refreshed and ready to go. And I said, "Hey, I feel great, 6 hours of sleep, and I'm ready to go." And they go, "No, you didn't sleep 6 hours. You slept 18 hours nonstop." I said it had rained between that time. They'd gone fishing and stuff too, and so I was tired then, and I think they finally realized that. We'd see float planes every now and then. Got buzzed by this one. They'd come by and they'd wave at us even. And one campsite that we set up, along shore, there was this big 50-gallon drum that we thought probably fell off a barge and just got washed ashore. And we set our camp up to it pretty close, had the campfire going, walked over and looked at it, and it was actually a 50-gallon drum full of airplane fuel. And these bush pilots would have stashes like that all around the area. So when they ran low on fuel, they knew where they could get some more. We moved our fire. We moved it away. I ran across a fish drying camp, and so we, stopped in just to visit with the people there. And there was an older couple, and they said, "Where are you going?" We told them we're going to Inuvik, and they said, "Well, can you deliver some messages for us?" I said, "The government was supposed to send us a new fishing net. We haven't got that. We're out of bug dope. We had some old mosquito coils that didn't really work very good in the tent anyhow." And so we gave them those. And then they gave us a bag of dried fish and said, "Can you take this to the radio station and have them call out, give this names to the people who can come up and collect their fish," or whatever. So we became a delivery system for them also. And so, but that was kind of interesting. Okay, another shot. Mountains were always in the background. We saw mountains all the time. But just another shot, floating along, no PDFs. This was called the Ramparts, and this was kind of an interesting spot too. These were limestone cliffs, some of them up to 250 feet tall, and the river narrowed to about half a mile at this point, and so the current really picked up in this area. This was a shot that I took off the internet again, and it's pretty close to what that first shot was like and stuff too. So. Right across a lot of abandoned cabins. I think this one was actually a former town called Little Chicago, and we're goofing off, acting like we're lost, and we probably were, but we were on the river and only had one way to go. So. More mountains, more river. Rock bedding. Now it's kind of hard to see, but off a ways you can maybe kind of see somebody there, and what they're doing is they found what we did for entertainment. You can see all the rocks along the shores, and we'd find a small log or a big stick, whatever you want to call it, and sometimes they were carved out by beavers, and we would bat rocks out into the river and then place bets to see who could bat a rock out before others and stuff. But yes, we were easily entertained. Another typical campsite. There were a lot of good campsites like this that we stayed at. Next slide, you have to use your imagination. I say mosquitoes because for the most part, if we found an open area, the sun was out, there was a little breeze, the mosquitoes were not that bad. If you stepped back into the bush, you were about carried away by the mosquitoes. My record, slapping somebody else on the back to see how mosquitoes I could kill, I killed 108 with one slap. But so we did not go into the bush too often. But in the areas where they were kind of bad at the camp, what we would do is, I'll get ready, get into the tent as fast as you could, zip it up, and then spend the next 5 or 10 minutes killing all the mosquitoes that you could that got in with us. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you'd still find some the next morning with a lot of blood in them. Mm-hmm. Okay, once we got off the main river, it turned into the delta, and the delta was a very big area, and we were warned, be very careful when you're in the delta. A lot of people get lost there, and so we were pretty careful about following the channel that we're in. But here's where we're getting into the delta. That's me, and I say saved from the quicksand. I was usually the first one that would get out of the canoe and then land the canoe, so we didn't run them up shore, anything else like that. Well, in the delta, the water slows down, and what happened is you get a lot of silt deposit in some of these areas. And I jumped out of the canoe and I just kept sinking and sinking and sinking. And I could hold on to the canoe, but I finally got out, and that's what it was. I just some very deep silt there, and I just got caught in it. Here's the town of Inuvik. This is where we ended up. And you can see the channel that kind of goes alongside it. We pulled into kind of a landing area there. One of the very first things I saw when we got out of there was this big conveyor belt made in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And so here we were, and now we're at the end of the trail, so to speak. And I just wanted to give a shout out to the RCMP. On the way there, we would stop at all the different little communities that were along the way. And I'm gonna have to backtrack and tell a story about one of those too. But we check in with the RCMP, and if we didn't show up someplace, they'd probably go out looking for us. But they were very good people. And when we got into Inuvik and we checked in with them and said, this is it. And we went to a bar, and the nickname of this bar was called the Zoo Bar, because the chair could stay empty for a whole long time, and then two people might want it at the same time, and all of a sudden a fight would break out. Pretty soon the whole bar turned into a fight. So we're having a beer there, and this guy comes over and he asks if he can join us, and he looked familiar, and then we finally figured out it was the RCMP person that we had checked in when we first got to Inuvik out of uniform. And he was telling us a little bit about how the RCMP had to operate in this type of territory. The story he told was that he had to go in this bar and arrest somebody one time, and he went in, and the guy was sitting with 3 other guys, and the guy said, "I'm not going with you." And he knew he was outnumbered, so he started walking away. He said he started getting out the door, and somebody else stopped him and said, "Constable, what's the problem?" And he said, "Well, the guy's supposed to go with me, he doesn't want to." And they said, "Well, you go back and ask him again." And so he did, and when he did, he had about 5 or 6 guys backing him up. And so the guy got up and quietly left with him. And so the RCMP said, we have to cooperate with the people. If we don't, they don't cooperate with us. And so they were, very, very good about knowing people. The other story that the last town that we hit before we got to a new river, and the name has changed in that. They've given it a different name, but at the time it was called Arctic Red River. And we're talking to some people there, and they said, well, Arctic Red River got its name because there was this big battle between the Inuits, the Eskimos, and the native population there, the Indians. An Eskimo Indian fight is the way they put it. And it was so bad that the river flowed red with blood. And I thought, okay, and you could see somewhat of an enmity, a tension between these two different groups of people. And I thought, the battle took place here, but you think they'd get over it. And then it turns out the battle was in 1942. So it was 30 years hence. There were still some pretty recent memories. I actually went on the internet to see if that story was true, and I couldn't find anything that confirmed it. It was a good story, but the river is called Arctic Red River because there was a lot of iron in the water there, and it turned it red. The big bonus that we got on this trip was at Inuvik, about the time we showed up, was something called the Northern Games, and it was like an Inuit Olympics. And this were different feats that the people would do to show their endurance, their strength, their ability to put up with pain. And they said all the things that you needed to be able to survive up there. This was called a high kick, and you can see in the center there's a guy that's kind of jumped up. And what high kick was that they would dangle a piece of fur down, and then you would go up to it, you'd kick it with one foot, and then you would land on the foot that you kicked it with. And they were kicking over 6 feet in the air. And in fact, the announcer said, does anybody out in the audience have a tape measure so we could see how high the boys are going? And that's the type of competition. They were all very encouraging, and it wasn't a bloodthirsty competition. But this was not at Inuvik that we saw, but this is high kick. That's kind of how it was done. This is called over the rope, and you can see a guy trying to twirl around that rope, and the rope wasn't really taut. It had some slack in it, and you get up there and you have a certain amount of time to try and go over that rope as many times as you could. And you can kind of see the guy working his way over there too. To me, I thought, that can't be that hard. And I was coming back from a party one evening, and I was walking by that, and there was nobody else around, so I tried it. I don't think I got around it once. And then there was somebody outside there sitting in a stand and started clapping when he saw me. So tug of war. They had a tug of war between the East and the West Inuits. These people came all the way from Alaska, Labrador to Alaska, and then they had a tug of war between the married women and the single women, and that type of thing. Tea-boiling, bannock, bread making. This contest, they had a pile of wood about 20 yards away from where they're working here. This was for women. They had to run over, get wood, run back, start a fire, boil tea, and make bannock. And the bannock is kind of like fried bread and stuff. So that was, and I think they were doing that 15, 20 minutes they were being able to do that. This one, I don't know what it was called. It's a weight hanging from an ear. And if you can see, the guy has a weight hanging from his ear. If you can make that out, kind of a bad slide. I don't know how much it weighed, 10, 15 pounds, something like that, but the object was to hang the weight from your ear and then walk along circles inside this gym for as long as you could. And this was only pure pain as far as I'm concerned. I didn't see any strength or condition that would help you survive. It's just a way that you could show how much pain you could get. The food, muktuk. Muktuk is whale blubber. I got to taste whale blubber. I got to taste dried caribou, other dried fish and stuff too. This was part of the whole thing. And for me, I went up to the stand to buy some mucktuck, and there's something else called muckluck, and that's your boots. And I ordered some muckluck, and they kind of looked at me and started laughing a little bit. But mucktuck, it's whale blubber with whale skin. The skin was chewy. The blubber tasted like blubber. Now we're up in Nunavik. We have no way out. Part of our planning for that part of the trip was a little bit slack. Well, we heard stories. One of them was that you could stow away on a barge, but you had to be careful that the captain didn't see you, or you'd make sure to turn around and off you would go. So you had to bribe a worker and try and get on a barge. The other way, which you could have flown out commercially, there was a big airline. They had a big airport there. This was an oil company town, and they had a big airport, so commercial flights came in, and it cost about $200 to fly out, and we probably had that much among the four of us, so that was not too much of an option. The other option was to hitchhike out in an oil company plane, and we talked to a guy that had done that. He told us about another guy he knew that spent one summer just hitchhiking around the whole Arctic on oil company planes. They were essentially the truckers up north. You know, if you ever hitchhiked, trucker liked you, you never wanted for a ride because you get on the radio and you could always get a ride. Anyhow, the airport was a few miles away from Nunavik. We caught a ride out there. We were hanging out. We were able to ship our canoes and some of our other equipment out on planes for 12 cents a pound. And I wish we could have shipped ourselves out for 12 cents a pound, but we couldn't do that. So we hang out at the airport. We finally met a pilot that said he would take us out. And this is part of the flight. You can see the MacKenzie River down below. Now he flew us down to Edmonton, and that is a Hawker Siddeley turboprop. I've always remembered the name of that type of plane. And there we are in Edmonton, and we got to see total darkness for the first time in about 5 weeks or so. But the adventure's not over. Our car is still 800-900 miles north in Fort Simpson. And so two of us started hitchhiking. I don't know how much time I've got.
We're ahead schedule.
Okay. Two of us started hitchhiking back to get our car, and our canoes and equipment were supposed to be shipped to Hay River, which was not too far from Fort Simpson. Me and the other guy, for a while, we caught rides together, but finally we get, trucker might say, well, I take one of you, but not both of you. And so we were kind of split up, and we ran across each other, and it was decided that I would stay at Hay River and the other guy would go up and get the car. And I caught a ride with the trucker, and he was kind of an introvert too. We didn't talk a whole lot, but he started shaking his wristwatch one time, and his watch had stopped. And I think something else went wrong, and then he said, at least the nice thing about driving on gravel, you can only drive 50 miles an hour and you never get a flat tire. Well, we pulled into the next truck stop, and he got out to check his tires, and he had a flat tire. And so I started thinking, maybe I'm bad luck, so I just stayed there and caught a different ride, and finally got to Hay River, and went to the pool hall there and met a couple of guys that said, knew I was looking, I needed a place to stay because the other guy hadn't gotten back to me yet. And so I stayed with them, and they warned me to watch out for this pickup, because there were forest fires up there in that time too. And they said, if you don't have a job and you're walking around and they want you to fight a fire, they recruit you. And if you say no, they're going to throw you in jail. Now, I don't know if it was true or not, but I did see the pickup, and I'd avoid that all the time. And after a couple of days, I was getting worried about whether my friend had got there or not. I went to the RCMP to see if they could radio up to Fort Simpson to see if anything had happened up there. And about the time they were getting a report back, my friend walked in on me. And I said, we couldn't figure out how he found me. He said, well, the first place he went to was the pool hall, and he ran into Pete, and Pete knew where I was at and stuff like that. So things that worked out. So then we finally got back to Edmonton, and we got back to Brookings. It was about the 1st of August, and I think when we got back, we had about $5 between all four of us. So we were broke, but we did get back. The whole trip, cost me about $200. That was for food, gas, everything. And again, we were very, very minimalist about it. That's pretty much what I've got to say. There's a kind of a recommendation of a book here called Disappointment River that came out about 6 or 7 years ago about a guy that did canoe the MacKenzie River from the start all the way up to the Bering Sea. So our trip, I like to say, was 1,000, but it was probably closer to 900 miles. And it was 4 weeks that we actually spent on the river, and then a couple other weeks getting back to where we needed to be. But the nice thing about this book is that he gets a hold of Alexander Mackenzie's original log himself, and he starts comparing what he's experiencing from what Mackenzie described and stuff too. And I have read some of Mackenzie's original log also, and some of the places that he talks about I recognize. But I want to thank everyone here for allowing me to give this talk. I started getting a lot of memories back after going over my log, and when I told Patrick I volunteered to give a talk like this, I had forgotten a lot of things that were going on. The only regret I have about the trip is that I lost contact with the people that I met, because we were 20, 21 years old. We were quite naive. We really didn't know what we were getting ourselves into, but everything worked out, and part of that was some of the great help we got from people along the way, and I regret not having stayed in contact with some of those people. And so that's what I've got. If you have any questions or have anything you'd like to comment on.
Roger, what'd you do for water? Boil, filter, what'd you for?
We just had cups tied to our canoe. We dipped them in the river and drank it. I know.
Nobody got charged.
No, nobody got charged. And if we found a lot of the streams and rivers that fed into it were some of them were glacial fed, we'd try and find those and we drink that water. But yeah, no. I think back on that, there was one town called Norman Wells, and it, again, an oil company town, and you could see a sheen of oil on the river in the end too. You know, and on one side of the river, it's where a lot of rivers were coming in, it was muddy. On the other side, it was quite clear. We usually stayed on the other clear side, except there's one other story about that too, is that we didn't see any bear, but we pulled into a camping site. You know, there was an abandoned cabin, and we thought those were always nice places to camp, and found a fresh bear trick that I could put both my hands inside of. And we decided, we moved on. But I always wanted to camp on the east side because the grizzly bears were predominantly on the west side, and it was brown bears on the east side, until somebody finally said, don't you know that brown bears are just as big, if not bigger, than grizzly bears? So, yeah, but no, that I think about that. No, we didn't get sick. We just dipped our cups in the water and we drank it. Yeah. So, yes.
How did you pick the MacKenzie to start with?
I don't know. It was either the MacKenzie or the Yukon, and so we just
Why
picked,
not?
why not? Yeah, that's about it. You know, I said we were pretty young, naive. We didn't know what we were getting ourselves into. I just heard an interview this morning on NPR with a guy called Jules Pfeiffer, and one of the comments he made, he said, "I don't know where I'm going until I get there," and that was kind of us. You know, but that's how we picked it out. And at the time, Inuvik, there is a road that goes there now, so you can get out on the road. But at that time, you got there, you were there, and only a couple of ways out. So, yes.
Was it cold at night? I know you talked about ice in July.
No, it really wasn't. I think we had one night where it maybe got down to 45 or something. We didn't have a thermometer, but I never got chilly in the sleeping bag, and some days I know it was up 90 degrees. It got pretty hot and stuff. I guess one other quick story, is that we got within 200 miles of a total eclipse too. And the thing that we found out is that mosquitoes seem to need sunlight to find you in that total eclipse. And it wasn't total where we were at, but it was definitely darker, and the mosquitoes seemed to be able to find us a little bit better too. But yeah. But no, I think, yeah, it's, well, ironically here too, with these things, I follow temperatures, and I follow the temperatures up in the Nuvik. 4 days ago, when it was 17 below in Brookings, it was 22 above in Nuvik. In Marfa, Texas was at 15 degrees, and there's probably, that would be maybe a 4,000 mile difference. So Nuvik, close to the Arctic Ocean, was warmer than South Texas. But yeah, no, we didn't have any trouble staying warm. So, anything else? Yes.
Roger,
No?
just on a personal note, I'm Mo Forstein, I live in Sioux Falls, but I met Roger about 3 years after that. And he's a great outdoorsman and a great conservationist and a great friend. So we stayed together for a long time, still see each other after retirement and stuff, but I was amazed because when he told me about his journey, his first journey, up at Brookings at SDSU, go Jacks. Oh, anyway, I was amazed. Here I thought I had seen a lot growing up on a farm by Aberdeen on the Jim River and the Sand Lake Refuge, but Roger told me about his stories and adventures. I really much appreciated that part of life too, because we kind of grew up in the same way. And so,
I apologize. I told you I'd be speaking at 1 o'clock, so. Yeah.
and that's fine, but he had told me. But anyway, as a personal note, he's done an awful lot, and I do appreciate him sharing those things. So, thank you.
Oh, yes.
Oh, how accurate were the maps you had? In other words, when you started, you know, you knew that when you got to the end, it was obvious you're there, but how did you know how many miles or how much distance you traveled? And did you have a goal that you wanted to be done by a certain time or not?
Yeah, I'm just going to pull something out here that I actually brought along some maps here if you want to take a look at them. I pulled about 4 or 5 of them out. I can't remember, we had about 15, 20. They were good maps. Now I've got this fork where the guy bent the tines out and then he would do this to measure the distance on the river. I don't know how accurate that was, but I've always kept that fork. I'm going to ended up with that. And our goal, I don't know, 30, 40 miles a day. We didn't really have a goal there either. I know one day, I told you about my miserable day and stuff, and that was probably a shorter day, but there was one day when we were all feeling pretty good and we made, I think, just about 100 miles. We just stopped and rest and eat a little bit and then keep going. But we made about 100 miles one day. We were, concerned about making it to Nuvik at a certain time, but we didn't really know. I mean, yes, we were on the river, it flowed pretty good, and so we thought, it's just faith that we'd make it there in time, but we didn't actually have a mileage set. And there were some days that we couldn't travel because the weather was too bad and stuff. So. Anybody else? Again, thank you very much. Appreciate it.